The search for signs of life enters a second day in South Florida after a devastating partial building collapse. 4 dead and nearly 160 unaccounted for. Questions remain around what could have caused the tragedy. Both sides of the aisle struck a deal on infrastructure, but both sides had to compromise, some calling it too small. And Trump's former lawyer Rudy Giuliani can no longer practice law in New York. The state Supreme Court has suspended him from practicing there, accusing him of lying about election fraud claims. Tune in to Deep Dive as we explore these topics and more. Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. Let's start off in the Sunshine State. At least 159 people are still unaccounted for in South Florida after a devastating partial collapse of a residential condo. 4 confirmed dead. Local officials worked through the night to try to find any possible survivors.
We are listening for sounds. It's not specifically, human sounds. It could be, tapping. It could be steel, kind of twisting. It could be some of the debris kind of raining down.
The search for signs of life enters a second day. The local community is waiting and praying for any positive news as rescue workers comb through debris. The 12-story building partially collapsed early Thursday morning. Dozens of first responders risking it all to try and find survivors.
This is the risk that we take. It's the risk versus benefit. Every time we have that belief that there's hope, with personnel that are trapped, we do risk our lives.
The causes of the collapse is still unknown. Some note the roof was undergoing work at the time of the collapse, but whether that's a factor in the tragedy is still unclear. The building's been there since 1981 and had 136 units. Officials are investigating potential causes of the collapse.
Buildings don't fall down in the United States.
Surfside Mayor Charles Burkett says,
"This is a third world country event, and we need to find out why this building fell down."
Surveillance video shows the 40-year-old building coming down in 2 parts, both pancake collapses, each floor on top of the other. Bal Harbour Mayor Gabriel Grossman says he lived there as a child and had been in there recently.
It's a building that's generally, at least from the outside, seems to be in good condition. It's a well-known, well-respected building. Obviously, there are issues there that weren't visible to the naked eye.
Now, some are weighing in with potential factors. A Florida professor published a study last year involving the building based on satellite data from 1993 to 1991. He says over those 6 years, the building moved half an inch. He said the sinking he identified wouldn't likely cause a collapse by itself, but it could be a contributing factor.
The thing is that the building moved at a very slow rate, but still moved. And usually things like that associated with some cracks in buildings and structural damage.
He said he didn't consider his findings unusual, as he'd seen other buildings in other areas moving at even higher rates. And local construction expert Gary Slosberg also had some ideas. He told Fox News that Miami's salty coastal air could speed up erosion of steel. He also said if it was built with a concrete slab with cables running through it and one of the cables broke, it could take down the whole building. There's no official cause yet. Now let's turn to that infrastructure agreement. After weeks of back and forth, both sides struck a deal, but many remain displeased.
We didn't get everything we wanted, but we came up with a good compromise that's going to help the American people.
Some say it's too small.
Way too small, paltry, pathetic. It has to be combined with a second, much more robust, adequate package to be deserving of a vote.
So what's the deal they reached? They settled $579 billion in new investments for roads, waterway, airports, and electric buses and charging stations, along with $266 billion for environmental projects, broadband, and the electric grid. According to the White House fact sheet, $266 billion goes to what's called other infrastructure, and $47 billion has been earmarked for resilience. Some are questioning what falls under these categories. The administration calls the plan, quote, the largest long-term investment in our infrastructure and competitiveness in nearly a century, an investment that will make our economy more sustainable, resilient, and just.
We've agreed on the price tag, the scope, and how to pay for it. It was not easy to get agreement on all three, but it was essential.
And who's paying for it?
And we're going to do it all without raising a cent from earners below $400,000. There's no gas tax increase, no fee on electric vehicles.
Instead, the package will be paid for by reducing the IRS tax gap, increasing revenue through enforcement, redirecting money from unemployment insurance and leftover emergency relief money, along with other means. The White House did not yet mention any increase in corporate taxes in this bipartisan deal. But a wealth tax will likely be included in the American Families Plan. Biden says he won't pass this bipartisan deal if his family's plan doesn't pass.
But if only one comes to me, I'm not. If this is the only thing that comes to me, I'm not signing it. It's in tandem.
Biden supports House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's plan to hold a bipartisan deal in the House until the Democrats' Human Infrastructure Families Plan passes the Senate with a budget reconciliation process.
But it's not going to be with Republican help. I'm going to have to get every Democrat and do it through reconciliation if it gets done.
The American Families Plan, expected to cost $1.8 trillion, would fund free community college, universal child care, affordable housing, tax credits, and more. Budget reconciliation only requires a simple majority in the Senate to pass. It's how the $1.9 trillion COVID relief package was passed. As for next steps, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi signals the House won't take up a bill until the Senate passes a reconciliation bill, either with or without a bipartisan bill.
So let me be really clear on this. We will not take up a bill in the House until the Senate passes the bipartisan bill and a reconciliation bill. If there is no bipartisan bill, then we'll just go when the Senate passes a reconciliation bill.
The Senate Budget Committee is working to find consensus by next Monday. And now let's turn to Trump's former lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. The New York Supreme Court has suspended him from practicing law in the state. The latest court filing accuses him of lying about election fraud claims. Former U.S. Attorney and New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani is speaking to reporters after a recent court order suspended his law license. The New York Supreme Court ruled on Thursday that Giuliani made, quote, demonstrably false and misleading statements on behalf of former President Trump. Giuliani calls the suspension one-sided.
The real problem here is somebody's got to fix this double standard justice system, which is not America anymore. I mean, I might as well be in Iran or East Germany before the change. This is a one-sided decision, not based on evidence, based on newspapers. I haven't called a single witness.
Giuliani spearheaded Trump's election fraud campaign in several battleground states, including Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania. The court said that Giuliani's statements about absentee and dead ballots were unsubstantiated. Citing the January 6 breach at the U.S. Capitol, the court criticized Giuliani's misconduct as immediately threatens the public interest. Giuliani says dozens of witnesses could back up his election fraud claims if he had the chance to testify.
What I would do is I'd come into court and I'd wheel in about 2,000 documents and say, okay, let me call my 40 witnesses. Now let's see if I'm lying. Let's see if I'm lying about the two people who saw ballots come in the middle of the night in Michigan. About 100,000. Turned out almost every one of them was for Biden. Or how about in Pennsylvania when they counted 500,000 votes, 99.9% for Biden and about 4 votes for Trump.
Giuliani's suspension was sought by the Attorney Grievance Committee for the First Judicial Department. The court order noted that the suspension is temporary and is dependent upon the outcome of a full formal hearing. Giuliani will have an opportunity to challenge the suspension in the hearing. The former mayor has not commented on the court's decision, but he retweeted the news and other users criticizing the decision. Giuliani's attorneys say they are disappointed and that Giuliani has not been offered a hearing before the suspension. Their statement says, "This is unprecedented, as we believe that our client does not pose a present danger to the public interest." Trump expressed disbelief in a statement that Giuliani could lose his law license for fighting what has already been proven to be a fraudulent election. Giuliani, along with 2 other attorneys, also face a defamation lawsuit from Dominion Voting Systems. And now, before we end, Pennsylvania's Republican-controlled legislature is moving quickly to pass a comprehensive election security bill. But they'll have to find a way to overcome the expected veto from the state's Democratic governor. The Pennsylvania General Assembly passed a sweeping election integrity bill that is expected to make it through the Senate this week. The state Democratic governor says he'll veto it. Republicans have a plan to put the voter ID requirement in the bill to the state's voters. The bill passed by the General Assembly requires voters to show ID every time they vote. It requires voters to register 30 days before an election, and it increases penalties for a variety of election-related offenses. Election officials would face up to 14 years in prison and $30,000 in fines for some election crimes. The bill also includes a section to increase accountability for election machine vendors. Democrat legislators say the voter ID requirement would stop some people from being able to vote. They say there is little evidence of fraud in Pennsylvania, so the bill isn't needed. The state's Democrat governor, Tom Wolf, tweeted that he'll veto it. Senate Republicans responded by passing a state constitutional amendment to require ID every time someone votes. For that amendment to come about, it would have to pass in 2 consecutive legislative sessions, and then it would go on to the ballot for voters to decide. Republicans note that voter ID is supported by a strong majority of voters. Republican State Senator Judy Ward says this is something that the people of Pennsylvania are begging for. If the measure passes this year and next year's legislative sessions, it would go on the ballot to voters in 2023. But what do you think? Let me know below. Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and have a wonderful weekend.